Tonight, remembering Norman Jewison, one of Canada's most celebrated filmmakers, dies at 97.
A Norman Jewison film.
A life lived with a lens on social issues.
Someone who made important films that really helped change the world.
A Hollywood legend who opened doors for homegrown talent. A controversial cap on international student visas.
It's a bit of a mess.
Plus, a landmark Canadian study reveals a major shift in the demographics of dementia. Also, the turbulent moment an Air Canada passenger tried to open a plane door mid-flight. And Canada's cutting-edge cosmic successor.
The world is looking to us to lead this next mission.
The telescope eyeing to take over Hubble.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. Tributes are pouring in tonight for one of Canada's most accomplished filmmakers, whose remarkable range and talent spanned a career that lasted decades. Norman Jewison's work covered themes that were comedic, but he also explored some of the most critical issues of our time. The 1967 film, In the Heat of the Night, delved into racial tensions, opening weeks after riots erupted in Detroit and Newark. And yet, Jewison always believed in the power of change. I've tended to show humanity as fallible, sensitive, befuddled, misled, but redeemable rather than mindless, he wrote in his autobiography, adding that his life's work was about getting people to recognize themselves in the movies he made. Here's CTV's Geneviève Beauchemin.
When Norman Jewison accepted a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1999, the scene captured so much of who the Canadian director was. His consummate drive to entertain, to also delve much deeper.
So just tell stories that move us to laughter and tears, and perhaps reveal a little truth about ourselves.
Jewison's film credits showed an ability to lift any story off the page, from comedies to tragedies.
Everybody is blaming you.
Weaving popular entertainment with social commentary.
They call me Mr. Tips.
In 1967, with In the Heat of the Night, he put the spotlight on the social climate of the civil rights era. With Fiddler on the Roof, he tackled the tale of a poor milkman in turn-of-the-century Russia. It was described as the most powerful musical ever made.
Where are you taking me?
To the bed.
And there was Moonstruck, an offbeat romantic comedy that became one of his greatest hits. His 24 theatrical features earned 46 Academy Award nominations and won 12 Oscars.
They pushed the limits of what was acceptable on screen at the time.
Jewison was born in Toronto, where he would reenact films he saw for neighborhood kids for 2 cents a head. He went on to study at the University of Toronto and eventually landed a TV job in New York City.
I don't want no sugar in my coffee.
That would see him direct the first U.S. TV special dedicated to a black performer, Harry Belafonte. Jewison was known as charming, strong-willed. A power player in Hollywood, he returned to Ontario in the 1970s, continuing his career but also starting the Canadian Film Centre. It nurtured the careers of hundreds, if not thousands, of actors and producers.
We should be concerned with capturing the imagination and dazzling the world with our brilliance.
I'm so grateful.
Even as he aged, he continued to earn accolades, but also to guide and inspire. Norman Jewison died at the age of 97. Geneviève Beauchemin, CTV News, Montreal.
In other news tonight, Canada is capping the number of international study visas. Ottawa says that will result in about 364,000 approvals, a 35% decrease from last year. The limit will only apply to post-secondary undergraduate students, not those in master's or doctoral programs or elementary and high school students. CTV's Kevin Gallagher on the impact.
On campus, some foreign students are upset the federal government plans to limit study permits over the next 2 years.
I don't think that's a fair decision. I have my own friends and siblings who wants to come here in Canada, but the chances are like 30% less now, 35% less.
Ottawa says curbing international student numbers is needed to reduce pressure on expensive rental housing.
Not surprised, because there's a lot of students over here. Few houses, everything's expensive.
This September, new international study permits will be capped at 364,000, a 35% decrease compared to the nearly 560,000 visas issued last year.
It's unacceptable that some private institutions have taken advantage of international students by operating under-resourced campuses, lacking supports for students, and charging high tuition fees.
There are some schools that frankly have come to exist to profit off the backs of vulnerable international students under the false promise of permanent residency that should never have been made. I expect that some of those schools may end up closing.
On average, international undergraduate students pay $30,000 more per year than domestic students in tuition. So any restriction will cut into college and university revenues.
Obviously, this is going to have an impact on the entire post-secondary system in Canada.
While opposition parties say the foreign student program was a success until the Liberals came to power.
I think all the discourse around the students really distracts from the major problem, which is the failure of the federal government.
Let's not blame the students. Let's not blame other levels of government. Let's blame the one man who is responsible for this disaster, and that is our incompetent Prime Minister.
Post-secondary schools in Nova Scotia, Ontario, and British Columbia will see the largest decrease in foreign students. The immigration minister says a lack of provincial funding in higher education drove those institutions to accept more international students. Omar?
All right, Kevin Gallagher at the Liberal Cabinet Retreat in Montreal tonight. And also joining us from there is CTV's chief political correspondent, Vashi Kapellos. Vashi, walk us through the reasoning for having this cap in place for 2 years, and also whether this policy will actually make housing more affordable.
Hey, Omar. Well, they really have a lot to do with each other. The cap is in place for 2 years so that at the end of those 2 years, the government can see whether their policy or their cap is having a tangible impact on housing affordability. And when it comes to affordability, what I'll be watching very specifically for is the rental market. Rents have gone up 22% in Canada in the last 2 years. A large part of that is the influx of temporary residents here. So whether this cap actually brings those rents down is the policy and political space to watch over the next 2 years.
Now, we know that addressing affordability is one of the ways the Liberals are hoping for a rebound after taking a hit to their polling numbers last year. How else are they strategizing at this cabinet retreat in Montreal?
Look, the ministers I talked to here say they're trying to do two things. One, identify what Canadians are worried about in a very specific way. Is it auto thefts? Is it affordability more largely? Is it grocery prices? Is it immigration and housing? And then the second part of what they're trying to do is actually propose some solutions. Remember 6 months ago at their last retreat, they didn't do that, and they suffered in the polls for it. They're trying to counter that narrative and that slide in the polls by doing those two things. Omar?
All right, Vashi, thank you. There is late word tonight of a helicopter crash in northwestern BC. Northern Escape Heliskiing confirmed 3 people have died in the accident near Terrace today. The company says it is working with the RCMP and other authorities on their investigation into the cause. We are learning about some tense moments aboard an Air Canada flight from London to Toronto. A passenger tried to open the cabin door midair. And as CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver reports, it is the latest in a series of similar incidents.
The Air Canada plane was traveling to Toronto when an elderly man authorities say was in a state of crisis and confusion tried to open a cabin door. Flight staff restrained him and the door never opened.
You should feel safe that the mechanisms to manage the opening and closing and the arming and disarming of those doors is under very, very tight control.
Airplanes are built so the cabin doors cannot open at cruising altitudes. They can, however, be unlatched on the tarmac or during parts of takeoff and landing. It's that ability analysts say allowed everyone on this Japan Airlines flight to evacuate safely.
Once you're on the ground and the cabin is unpressurized, if the slide is armed, if it's hooked to the door, once the flight attendants open the door, the slide will deploy and allow exit from the aircraft.
Last May, a passenger who told police he felt suffocated opened the cabin door of an Asiana Airlines flight as it was landing.
Wait, what?
And in November, while still on the tarmac, a man on a Southwest Airlines flight opened the door, then jumped on the wing.
We got a situation here. We had a passenger decide to go ahead and jump out the
emergency exit.
Earlier this month, on an Air Canada flight at Pearson, a man was arrested after he opened a cabin door and fell onto the tarmac. In a statement, Air Canada says, "We constantly review our processes, including after incidents. In both cases, our approved safety and handling processes were correctly followed."
The danger to the rest of the passengers on the airplane is minimal. The individual who does that door opening is the one that's most at risk.
That conversation about door safety largely sparked after this door plug recently fell out of an Alaska Airlines flight midair.
Experts say that situation is different since it was caused by a malfunction of the 737 MAX airplane. Tonight, American regulators are recommending inspections, Omar, on another 737 model.
All right, Annie, thanks. Planes caught in a powerful storm struggled to land across northern Europe, forcing some passengers to end up at the wrong destination.
There we go. Get it down, boss.
Storm Isha unleashed hurricane-force winds as many flights in the UK were cancelled, delayed, or diverted. Heavy waves also slammed the Irish coast. At least 2 people died when the storm lashed Ireland and Britain. Fierce winds reached 160 kilometers and left thousands without power. Politicians in Israel came face to face today with the family members of hostages held by Hamas. They stormed a meeting in Israel's parliament demanding the government do more to bring home their loved ones. And European foreign ministers hosted Israeli and Palestinian diplomats today. The EU, along with Canada and the U.S., are calling for a 2-state solution, which the Israeli prime minister has rejected. India's prime minister inaugurated a new Hindu temple today on a site that represents the country's deep religious fault lines. Millions of devotees celebrated as Narendra Modi's Hindu National Party fulfilled an old promise ahead of an upcoming election by building this temple. It stands on controversial land that was once home to a 16th century mosque destroyed by Hindu rioters more than 30 years ago. Another populist leader made a different kind of appearance tonight, rallying voters in New Hampshire ahead of that state's primary tomorrow.
We have to send the signal that we're not playing games. This country has gone to hell.
Donald Trump has a double-digit lead in what is now a two-way race with Nikki Haley after Ron DeSantis dropped out of the Republican contest yesterday. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joe Malbin is in Manchester, New Hampshire tonight.
What size are you?
In New Hampshire, when it comes to politics, anything can happen, and Nikki Haley's hoping to pull off an upset.
It is go time. Tomorrow is the day.
The former South Carolina governor is banking on independents who can vote in this primary, and Republicans who are fed up with what they say are the lies and chaos of the last Trump presidency.
I believe Trump's very beatable, and I hope he is for the good of the country. It's scary how many people still believe his lies.
It's an uphill battle. If the new polls are correct, Trump has a double-digit lead here. And now that Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has bowed out and endorsed Trump,
I think those people will all come to me.
fighting to the finish, New Hampshire, the last best chance Haley has to topple Trump.
I know the political class is saying everybody needs to get behind Trump. This is not a coronation.
And she's pulling out the stops, insisting Trump at 77 and Joe Biden at 81 are just too old for the job, even questioning Trump's mental fitness over the weekend when he said this about the January 6th Capitol attack, confusing Haley for former Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Nikki Haley is in charge of security. We offered her 10,000 people, soldiers, National Guard, so whatever they want.
We can't have someone else that we question whether they're mentally fit to do this.
A New Hampshire victory would pretty much wrap it up for Trump. In an interview tonight, he said he wouldn't ask for Haley to drop out before the vote, but added perhaps she should. Omar?
All right, CTV's Joy Malbin in New Hampshire tonight. Joy, thank you. There is a warning tonight about the number of Canadians living with dementia. It's expected to surge in the next 25 years, and the demographics of patients impacted is also changing. CTV's Heather Wright on the challenges.
The number of Canadians living with dementia is expected to skyrocket over the next 25 years, from an estimated 650,000 people to 1.7 million.
multiple reasons. Population is aging, the presence of different risk factors that will lead to dementia, some of which are modifiable. And so there are things that we can do.
The Alzheimer's Society of Canada conducted the study based on census data and found the demographics of dementia are quickly changing, and the way the disease is assessed and treated must shift as well. Nearly 90% of those with dementia today describe themselves as European or Canadian, but by 2050, it's estimated that 1 in 4 Canadians living with dementia will be Asian, including those with roots in countries like China, Korea, India, and Pakistan. The study also predicts large increases among those with African, Latin American, and Indigenous roots.
We really need to address that lack of awareness piece.
Navjot Gill is studying dementia and has a grandmother who lives with the disease. She says it was hard for her family to find culturally inclusive information when her grandmother was first diagnosed, something vital to breaking down barriers and stigma.
Having resources which are linguistically appropriate, so explaining dementia with a cultural sense of how they would understand it.
An early diagnosis of Alzheimer's may also soon be on the horizon. A separate study published today found a blood test that looks for a certain type of protein could be used to screen for the disease before symptoms even begin.
These blood tests, in addition to detecting disease, will also help people make better choices for prevention and for slowing down these conditions.
The Alzheimer's Society of Canada is calling on governments to invest now to prepare for an increase in dementia patients in the coming decades. Omar.
All right, Heather, thank you. Coming up, a malaria milestone.
This has been a long time coming, and this is a major step forward.
The world's first mass vaccination program launches in Cameroon. Plus, seeing the universe in ultraviolet. A giant stride for global health tonight. Cameroon has become the first country to roll out the world's first vaccine program against malaria. CTV's Sarah Plowman on the milestone.
In countries where a mosquito bite can be deadly, the smallest face the largest threat. Now a new defense, a routine malaria vaccine program, a first for Cameroon and the world.
This has been a long time coming, and this is a major step forward.
This moment took around 40 years. Another prevention tool besides nets.
The scale up of the malaria vaccine through strong and established platforms for immunization is projected to save tens of thousands of lives each year.
The World Health Organization says in 2022 there were nearly 250 million cases of malaria globally. More than 600,000 people died. Nearly 80% were children under 5, almost all in Africa.
Cameroon is one of the countries in West Africa where there's a lot of malaria, about 6 million cases a year. 12% of the deaths are from malaria. So certainly a country that can benefit from this vaccine.
While some clinics reported a positive response, not every parent is convinced. This woman walked away, saying she didn't know enough about the vaccine. The nurse says it's regrettable and she'd like to see more awareness. Cameroon's program follows pilots in Kenya, Ghana, and Malawi. The rollout will be replicated in 19 other African countries. Some have already received shipments. A second malaria vaccine could be launched later this year. The head of the WHO says having 2 vaccines could help close the huge gap between supply and demand. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Fredericton.
Still ahead. The big fish and the 100-pound jackpot. Another royal has revealed details about her medical condition. The Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, says she has malignant melanoma, a form of skin cancer, months after she was treated for breast cancer. The former wife of Prince Andrew shared on social media that the diagnosis has been a shock, but is in, quote, good spirits. King Charles has prostate surgery this week as the Princess of Wales recovers from a major abdominal operation. Chaos for commuters in Vancouver today after transit workers walked off the job.
I got across last night, can't get across this morning.
Bus and C-Bus services have been halted as part of a 48-hour strike over increased staffing and more pay. Talks between the union and the employer broke down over the weekend. And a Quebec man and his nephew have quite an ice fishing tale to tell. Rémi and Mathieu Aubin caught a fish weighing a massive 49 kilograms or 109 pounds. It took them 4 hours to reel in the halibut in the fjord du Saguenay. Quite the catch. Coming up, Canada's next giant leap in space. For decades now, the legendary Hubble telescope has been demystifying deep space. But as it gets older, some Canadian astronomers are taking the long view. Here's Jill Makashan.
It's called the CASTOR Space Telescope, much smaller than Hubble and much more powerful. About the size of a compact car, the CASTOR telescope will be able to see 100 times what Hubble can see in ultraviolet light.
So CASTOR is the Cosmological Advanced Survey Telescope for optical and ultraviolet research. And what that whole mouthful means is basically we're building a Canadian-led 1-meter flagship space telescope, a successor to the Hubble.
The Hubble Space Telescope, which also sees in UV, has been the astronomers' workhorse for nearly 30 years, giving scientists some of their first close looks at the universe. But Hubble is gradually being dragged back into Earth's atmosphere, and many say it's time to replace it.
Over time, systems break, detectors degrade. That's the natural course of things. The other thing about Hubble, so it did really, really amazing things, but it actually is looking at a really tiny little slice of the sky.
The CASTOR telescope would see wide swaths of the universe, technology to complement the James Webb Space Telescope and the European Union's newly launched Euclid, both of which see in infrared. The CASTOR telescope would provide astronomers a view of the ultraviolet.
And that's where we can find accreting supermassive black holes and exploding stars and key insights into the evolution of the cosmos.
100 Canadian researchers, engineers, and industry leaders have been working on this project for more than a decade, but CASTOR is not built yet. Federal funding is required, about $300 million. Expect more discussion around funding when Parliament resumes next week. But the aim, scientists say, is to have the Canadian-made telescope in space by 2030. Jill Makashan, CTV News, Winnipeg.
And that is a snapshot of this Monday. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night, and see you tomorrow.
She had gone through so much, it just didn't seem fair.
A Canadian icon's heartbreaking health crisis.
Stiff person syndrome.
W5 dispels the myths.
It's a disorder that takes over your life.
All new next Saturday at 7 on CTV.